When Game of Thrones first premiered, it reshaped how audiences saw high fantasy on television. Adapted from George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, the HBO drama became a cultural phenomenon by balancing political intrigue, layered characters, and carefully measured fantasy elements. Its mix of realism, shocking twists, and emotional investment made it stand apart, drawing in viewers far beyond traditional fantasy fans. Since then, streaming platforms have chased the formula, hoping to replicate its success. Projects like The Witcher, Shadow and Bone, The Rings of Power, and The Wheel of Time all carried the weight of being labeled the next Game of Thrones. Yet, despite large budgets and beloved source material, none have reached the same heights. Many shows focus too heavily on spectacle, gritty violence, or magical lore while neglecting the slower character development that made HBO's series so gripping. The most devastating turns in Game of Thrones worked not because of brutality but because audiences were deeply invested in the people caught up in them. Season 1 took its time, grounding each character before pushing them into shocking situations like Ned Stark's execution. Viewers kept watching not simply for dragons or battles, but because they cared about what happened to these complex figures. In contrast, modern fantasy adaptations often rush to dazzle, trimming seasons short and leaving little room for emotional connection. Another overlooked element of Game of Thrones was its strong political foundation. At its core, the series resembled a political drama more than a traditional fantasy, with power struggles and moral dilemmas often more compelling than supernatural threats. This balance made the show accessible to audiences who might not normally embrace sprawling fantasy worlds. By comparison, other series lean too quickly into their magical elements, limiting their wider appeal. Faithfulness to source material also played a role in the show's early success. The first seasons stayed close to Martin's novels, pleasing longtime fans while easing newcomers into the story. Other adaptations, such as The Wheel of Time and The Witcher, have faced backlash for diverging too far from the books, alienating the very audiences most likely to support them. Perhaps the biggest difference, however, is that Game of Thrones was given time to grow. Once it became popular, there was little concern it wouldn't see its story through to an ending. Viewers today are far more hesitant to commit to new fantasy series, as frequent cancellations leave stories unfinished. Without that security, it's difficult for audiences to form the same deep investment. The lesson for streaming platforms isn't to mimic Game of Thrones, but to build their own identities with patience, character focus, and strong storytelling. Shows like Arcane and his Dark Materials have succeeded by standing apart rather than chasing comparisons. The fantasy genre still has the potential to thrive on television, but only when studios stop trying to copy the past and instead commit to telling stories that feel both original and complete.